Hey everybody, welcome into another edition of the Retro Wrestling Rewind. As always, I am David Fine of the Retro Wrestling Rewind, and the man to my over there in the viewing screen right here on onewrestling.com, and of course on our Facebook page, on our Instagram, on our Twitter, on our everything, on our social media is the great Tyler Peters, all the way from Nashville, Tennessee. Tonight, I mean, this is,
Yes.
I picked this one. Hopefully it'll be a good one. We'll see what you pick for next week. I'm putting you up the task. I'm putting you on the booking sheet because unfortunately Michael's not able to be with us this week, but he's in our prayers. And he'll hopefully be back next week. He'll definitely be with us hopefully next week. This week we have In Your House 11, Buried Alive. I mean, before we get started, what were your thoughts on it when I picked it? I mean, in the main event, it's got the Undertaker not with Paul Bearer. He's with Mankind. Mm-hmm. Mankind is with Paul Bearer. What are your thoughts on this?
It was a unique time in the business in the WWE at the time, seeing Paul Bearer be the heel, the villain against the Undertaker. But what a wild match! There was still some solid matches, and it was a very solid show. I wouldn't say overly great, but it was still pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those. It's not the best show that we've covered. Of course, it's not the worst. But of course, as you see on the bottom of the screen, you can watch this video streaming soon on onewrestlingvideo.com. I just want to thank Bill Apter. He is a man. He is the myth. He's the icon. He's one of those guys. If you look at it like an NWA show or a WWF, mainly WWF show, you would see him at ringside taking pictures, writing for the magazines, taking pictures. I mean, it's just an honor to be up on that website. But yeah, I mean, just look at onewrestlingvideo.com. It's going to be it's up. Of course it's up. You're watching it on onewrestlingvideo.com. But yeah, I mean, this show this week, the first match we had, well, it's an interesting dynamic. Stone Cold Steve Austin taking on Hunter Hearst Helmsley. He was, I don't know at this time, I don't think he was in the McMahon family as of yet. But what were your thoughts on Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Stone Cold Steve Austin?
I thought this was a very good match. It showed you how well of a worker, technically sound, scientifically, was Steve Austin. And this was the early stages before he really took on that Stone Cold persona. We were starting to see that and witness it firsthand. And Triple H, to me, deserves to be in the conversation with all the top workers. He was really great in this match, and him and Austin had just terrific chemistry. That's what I took away from watching this opening contest between Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Steve Austin.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I have a big debate that I go back and forth with people. Did you like the stunning Steve Austin gimmick in WCW, or were you more of a fan of when he went to the WWF, WWE, and went over to Stone Cold? Of course, he was the $1 Million champion for a little bit. He had the belt from Ted DiBiase. I mean, that was okay, but then he went to the full-fledged Stone Cold. Which one did you like better?
You know, Stone Cold has a special place just because his attitude, his work rate was still much like Stunning Steve, and going back to the Hollywood Blondes with Brian Pillman. It's hard to say because I'm a fan of all of Steve Austin's work, but as far as him becoming a major star and really popular, you have to go with the Stone Cold gimmick. That was made Vince a lot of money, and some would argue made the WWF at the time go public.
Yeah, I mean, it was, the only thing, to be honest with you, that I was annoyed by this Stone Cold Steve Austin error was the what chant. Mm-hmm. I mean, he started that and it was weird. I was watching, I'm not sure, I think it was WrestleMania, one of the WrestleManias, the Hall of Fame introductions. And I know it's sports entertainment and we're supposed to have a good time watching it, but they kept on interrupting every speech with the what chant. And it's one of those things that have you seen any of this Broken Skull interviews?
I've seen bits and pieces. I want to go back and watch those series. He's got Drew McIntyre, who is the Raw champion, and I hear the Undertaker ones are gold. Those are the ones to go watch.
Yeah, I mean, you find out a lot about the Undertaker from the Undertaker, Mark Calloway, the man, the myth, the legend, who has been in the same gimmick since 1996. I mean, the longevity. I mean, yeah, he's changed incarnations. He's changed his look. He went from the biker to this and that. I mean, I'm more of a purist Undertaker. I'm not sure what's your opinion on the Undertaker through his 30 years in wrestling, in the WWE.
I agree with that. I'm a big fan of when he first came, but there's no doubt. No matter the twist he put on that character, it was still him. I mean, it was true to Mark Calloway. It was true to the Undertaker gimmick. And we saw that in this pay-per-view, this match with Mankind, some of what he was changing as far as his skill set in the ring and outside of the squared circle. And I can't wait to talk more about that. So that was a great segue from.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I was more of a Stunning Steve Austin fan. I mean, when he was with Brian Pillman as a Hollywood Blondes, I mean, they were a great tag team. I mean, there'll be a lot of people that'll disagree with that because they're like, he was just like phenomenal in the WWE, but that's just my opinion.
Hey, that's what's great. We all have our versions and characters we loved in different companies, so hey, it works.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, it was a good opening match. I mean, it went a grand total of 15 minutes 30 seconds. It was funny. They had a dark match. The Stalker Barry Windham taking on the great Justin Bradshaw Layfield with Uncle Zebekiah. That was, of course, in a dark match. But the next match we had on the card was for the WWF tag team titles. The champions, Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, with Clarence Mason. They took on Bart and Billy Gunn, the Smoking Guns. I mean, what was your thoughts on, first of all, the Owen Hart British Bulldog combo with Clarence Mason as the tag team champions and Bart and Billy, the Smoking Guns?
I thought both were great teams. Clarence Mason was a great character, but there's no denying Jim Cornette fit better with Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. This was a very solid match. You know, the Smoking Guns, Bart and Billy, were great big athletes, but as far as innovation and work in the ring, I've got to be partial to Owen and the British Bulldog here.
Yeah, I mean, I just had this debate. I mean, do you have an Owen and the British Bulldog team up? Do you think it was comparable to the British Bulldog and the Dynamite Kid? I mean, they were a great cohesive unit as the British Bulldogs, but Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, they were still a great tag team.
They were. I mean, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith, what I enjoyed, and I'm kind of fast forwarding going to the finish. I mean, think about the intelligence being a step ahead. Davey Boy Smith was behind Bart Gunn. You know, the Smoking Guns, Billy Gunn was coming off the top for that sidewinder, that big leg drop, and he missed, and that's what caused Owen and the British Bulldog to win the match. So it was even things like that, the nuances that we've talked about that were special about the Owen Hart British Bulldog combination as a team.
Yeah, I mean, and what were your thoughts on, I mean, Bart and Billy Gunn? I mean, the Smoking Guns. I mean, of course, Billy Gunn is currently a trainer, I think producer, maybe in All Elite Wrestling. But I mean, what were your thoughts on the Smoking Guns? The gimmick, the kind of cowboy gimmick. I mean, do you think that would work today?
It wouldn't work today, but I think back in that era, that time it did. They were underrated. I mean, they shouldn't be overrated necessarily, but they were good workers. They did what they needed to do, and they could go, and they proved that in all these matches. That's why they got this kind of push for the In Your House pay-per-views and all the pay-per-views, not just meaning In Your House. That's why their dynamic worked with the British Bulldog, Owen Hart, any team, because let's give them a lot of credit and respect.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, Clarence Mason. I mean, what was your overall thought of that gimmick? It was kind of a Johnny Cochranist, gimmick. I mean, they're playing off the whole OJ thing. I mean,
Sure.
what were your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's exactly what they were doing. I mean, that was the hot topic, whether fair or not, at the time with the O.J. Simpson murder case, and I think if I remember right, Ernie Ladd had actually put in a good word for Clarence Mason. I found that out on I think Bruce Pritchard's podcast with Conrad Thompson. Got to give them credit for that bit of information that he was brought in, and they said he just was a wrestling fan, and he did that character well, playing the Johnny Cochran, like you mentioned, David, that ripoff of the snobby, that attorney that nobody likes, but he's good at what he does, is what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, I mean, it was definitely one of those things that they were definitely playing up to the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you see that as much now where they play off things that are going on in the news? I mean, you haven't seen a COVID gimmick, I mean, you haven't seen,
no,
they don't do that as much anymore and I think it's because of the pushback of the instant feedback right now. I mean, if someone hates something, they could tweet on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram during the match. And, they will find out instantly. But back then you had to like mail it in, or you had to maybe not show up to an event. But I mean, do you think that has anything to do with kind of the not doing anything that's currently in the news?
Yeah, I think it's just its times are different, and it would just be out of poor taste to do something based out of COVID. The only close thing I would think would be Retribution, trying to play maybe in the riots and stuff, which is probably not a fair comparison, and don't want to go there and suggest that WWE needs to do that. But now they've kind of downplayed that. They're just part of the show on Raw. So that would be the only example I've really seen or witnessed that would be close to anything that we've saw just earlier this year. But I'm not even sure that's where the idea came from, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. But the next match we had on the card was for the Intercontinental title. It was the great, too sweet Mr. Mark Marrow with the very, very, very pretty Sable taking on Goldust with Marlena. She was no slouch. I mean,
no, she wasn't either.
I mean, and I have not seen her recently, but I mean, of all the people, go back and go incognito on your browser. No, I'm just joking. Just look and say, yeah, be careful. Look up Marlena, Sable, maybe even oh God, what's her face though? Oh Lord, I'm blanking. But just go look and like from Missy Hyde. I mean, people from there to now. Some people, I mean, I'm just saying, some people keep better in years than some. I mean, what were your thoughts on this match? I mean, what were your thoughts on Mark Marrow as the Intercontinental Champion?
You know what? Mark Marrow, to me, was a good worker for the high-flying stuff. To me, Goldust kept him grounded. Goldust impressed me as a big guy, also a wonderful athlete that could go. We knew that from his pedigree as a Rhodes, being the natural Dustin Rhodes. And he embodied this gimmick. I know we got a big tickle when Mike was here, the whole seductive thing. Oh, Tyler's got a thing for Goldust, but he was a great wrestler, and Vince noticed that, and that's why he got that push with Marlena, and the feud worked with Marrow and Sable. And this actually was a good match. I don't think it was bad. It wasn't great, but it was still good because it took both these guys, the two guys, to tango as far as the wrestlers to be able to pull off a bout like this.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, I'd say it was definitely a good match. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, I keep on saying this, like with the Undertaker, he just see, the difference between, I think, the Undertaker and Goldust is, yeah, Undertaker is just retiring. He's retiring after 30 years, but he does not wrestle on a consistent basis. Goldust wrestles on a consistent basis. Like, he was in WCW, he was in the WWE, took a little time off. He's in AEW, he wrestles all the time. He wrestles on a consistent basis. Can you believe that he has still been wrestling this many years?
I can believe it just because of his work rate, like we were talking about going back to his matches with Marrow. He reinvents himself, much like Undertaker, much like Mick Foley with Mankind, Dude Love, Cactus Jack. All these wrestlers that are really good that will become legendary. And I think, Dustin Rhodes deserves that recognition to be a legend because he's put in the years. He's put in the work. Now he's got a wrestling school he's opened up. And it does not surprise me to see him still be successful with AEW now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, he's one of those guys that, I mean, he could wrestle until the day he dies. I mean, he's one of those people that loves what he does. I mean, it's one of those things nowadays that you don't get much of. I mean,
no.
Speaking of have you, when we get off of the broadcast today, I want you to Google AEW Christmas Story. They reenacted a scene from Christmas Story. Did you see that?
I heard about it, but I need to go back and watch it. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why I was thinking about this, but it just seems, I mean, they have some great ideas, but the next match we had on the card, actually, before we get to that, I'm going to take a little break. Just wanted to know, I mean, how can people, how can they get to see you, online, on Instagram? I mean, how can they do that?
They can go to @DustinTyler86 on Twitter and DD Peters 86 on Instagram. That's DD Peters 86 on Instagram. I'll say it again because I got a little tongue tied there, but that's the social media profiles that I'm doing my most work that you can see with writing and podcasting, just like with you, David, and just some blessed to have these opportunities. So that's just real simple.
I mean, any good topics on any good podcasts you're coming up on that you want to maybe give them a little love?
Yeah, this Thursday night will be on the Rewind Wrestling Radio podcast. We'll be reviewing the current product this week in wrestling and just all that stuff. We had a guest last week, so it was a lot of exciting things happening on that podcast, just like here with yours. And, just so fortunate to be with so much talent. That's all I can say.
I don't know who you're talking. Oh, me. Oh, yeah.
No, I'm talking about you.
Of course,
I'm putting you over.
Well, thank you, good brother. But I'm teasing. I've decided I'm picking the shows next week. We are actually. Since this will be our last show of the year, because not next week. Well, actually, next week, it's not going to be the last show of the year, but we are going to do a twofer. We're going to go watch 2 shows and talk about 2 shows. You up for that?
Yeah.
Alrighty, the first one we're going to be talking about is In Your House 9 International Incident.
Wow.
It's got some great matches, like the Body Donna, Skip and Zip, taking on the Smoking Guns, Bart and Billy. A tag team match with Harvey Whippleman as a special guest referee. Mankind defeated Henry O'Godwin. We had Steve Austin, Mark Marrow, The Undertaker taking on Goldust, and Camp Cornette in the main event. The British Bulldog, Owen Hart, and Vader taking on the People's Posse of Ahmed Johnson, Shawn Michaels, and Psycho Sid, with the great Jose Lothario in their corner. So that'll be definitely a different one.
It will.
It'll definitely be. And then the next one we're going to be talking about on the same show. It's a 2. Yeah, folks. We are watching 2 shows. I'm going to have to tell Mike he's going to have to do, if he's around and he feels up to it, we're going to get him back on the show next week. Just sending out some love towards him and his family right now in this hard time that they're going through. Sure. I know you definitely feel that. We're talking about WCW's Mayhem 1999. It had Chris Benoit, Jeff Jarrett, Evan Courageous, my favorite wrestler, Disco Inferno, Norman Smiley, Brian Knobbs, The Revolution, which was Perry Saturn, Dean Malenko, and Asaya, taking on the Filthy Animals, Eddie Guerrero, Billy Kidman, and Tori Wilson. Sorry, I got distracted. Tori Wilson, she's
that's worth getting distracted. I mean, that's a beautiful woman.
Yeah, taking on Buff Bagwell and Kurt Hennig in a retirement match. We had Bret Hart for the title. Tournament semifinal. Vampiro taking on a wrestler by the name of Alex Wright under a different name, different gimmick called Berlin. That seems that seems like a little. Anyway, Ming, Total Package, Scott Hall, Booker T, David Flair fought Kimberly. Okay. Goldust taking on Sid Vicious, and in the main event for the vacated title, we had Benoit, Bret Hart. It's definitely going to be a extended, long, good show. But I like that idea. I mean, what are your thoughts on a show, if a show covers not just ours, but other shows that you've been listening to, if they cover more than one topic? Are you a fan of that?
Yes, because it gives a variety. You can kind of open it up, go a little more in long form. There's more matches to talk about, more about the storylines, what was going on during that year. And you can actually compare years because it doesn't have to, the two pay-per-views you mentioned are not in the same year. So that's an interesting in itself, that fact, into the conversation. So there's a lot of ways you can open up the dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another thing that we're going to be doing in the new year. We're going to be, getting a WWF, WWE pay-per-view and then comparing it to a WCW pay-per-view kind of in the same month, same day, whatever, compare and contrast and see at the time what the product was better and what was different. It's something that's new that's coming up in the brand new year. But of course, you can watch this video in its entirety at onewrestlingvideo.com. That's onewrestlingvideo.com. The next match we had on the card was another barn burner. It was a singles match to determine the number one contender to the WWF Heavyweight Championship at the Survivor Series. And of course, it had Psycho Sid with Shawn Michaels taking on the man simply known as Vader with the world's, I think, number one wrestling journalist, archivist, and manager, Jim Cornette. What were your thoughts on this match?
I thought this was actually a very good match. It was unique in the fact that you had two big monsters like Sid and Vader going at it. The stipulation was interesting, the Battle of the Power Bombs. That in itself was different because I've only known Sid to do the power bomb, but I guess Vader was doing that move, so that's why it worked. And, you had Jim Cornette, you touched on it, the greatest manager, him and Heenan. I put them both up there on the top as far as managers. And what I came away impressed by is Sid being 6'9", at his weight, being able to do a sunset flip. That speaks to his athleticism. Vader was so stiff in the corners. They told a good story, and catching Sid off the top rope. I mean, these guys were selling, but they were also doing some impressive big man moves to each other. It was just, I was in awe of it. I was actually taken away like this was actually a very good match. It was not sloppy and just all over the place like one might expect.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not a big Psycho Sid fan. I mean, I've had some, I've worked with some people in the past that have kind of had some run-ins with him. So, I mean, I've never been I was more of a, when he was under the gimmick, and I think it was in like CWA or Memphis, when he had the mask on, the kind of the Jason mask on. I mean, I'm more of I'm more of a Vader fan. I mean, it's interesting. Shawn Michaels was Psycho Sid and Vader. It's the whole Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette, he got put into a lot of weird situations. Like he was like the international liaison to Yokozuna. I think he's one of those guys that's like, I don't care what I do as long as I'm getting a payday. I mean, he knows that wrestling is just theatrics. And I mean, I do think he is probably Bobby Heenan, like I've said before, and I will say it till the day I cannot say it anymore. If he had had a podcast, if Bobby the Brain Heenan had a podcast called like, Brain Teaser, something funny like that, of the stories he would have had. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, he would be the number one podcast in all of podcasts.
Oh, I agree. I mean, yeah, you just said it. The story's not just on the road, but the guys he's managed much. That's why Cornette's is so successful because these guys knew the business. I mean, they grew up loving it, being fans. They were under the learning tree of a lot of great promoters, and we're in some of the biggest companies internationally in the world, not just here in the States. So that helps too. And to have the great co-hosts they do, and but even if they were just their own hosts, it would be fantastic. I mean, I don't know what other podcast you'd want to listen to, with all due respect to all the good ones out there, because these guys, if Heenan had one, and we know Cornette, how good his are.
Yeah, I mean, he's got so many, the drive through, the
Hmm.
whatever.
The experience.
He definitely. I mean, I really like his podcast, but after about 5 hours, some of them do last.
Oh, they go a long time.
I mean, I love a good podcast. Like I love the Tony Schiavone's one. I mean, what
That's a
happened
good
when,
one.
but I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many, but it's one of the ones that just ramble on. And it's like, I subscribe to a podcast. I'm like, hey, this looks great. Then I look at 5 hours. I'm like, 5 hours. No one really has time to listen, to sit down, listen for a 5 hour podcast. And if you listen to it like bits and pieces, it's going to take you forever to get through one episode.
Yeah, it is. And that's what I do a lot of times. YouTube will have, certain clips of Cornettes and like Tony Schiavone and Bruce Pritchard, and I'll just go and do it that way, because you're right. If it's 5 hours, I could watch a pay-per-view and a little more for that.
Yep. But it's now time for your main event. It is of course Tyler's number one match for the evening. It's the Buried Alive match. The Undertaker without Paul Bearer taking on Mankind with Paul Bearer.
Yeah, this was one of my favorite matches because I'm a big fan of Paul Bearer, as you know, but also The Undertaker and Mankind, Mick Foley. These guys had great chemistry, and I love the storyline. It was intriguing. I know it seemed cartoonish and kind of out there at the time, but they were really doing some impressive stuff in the ring. They were creative. The Undertaker was starting to come into his own, diving over the guard railing. We know the bumps Mankind does, and these guys were putting their bodies on the line. It was buried alive. It was something new, something different that you kind of could see in a movie, but it worked in wrestling. That's why it's more the sports entertainment genre. And The Undertaker doing that clothesline and coming off the top rope and doing all of what he was doing was just, you wouldn't see him doing that early on. And this was in the mid 90s. He was starting to change his repertoire around, his skill set, excuse me, there. How, the word to describe that.
I mean, what were your thoughts on? I mean, Buried Alive, it's a gimmick match. What were your thoughts on like gimmick matches? I mean, we've covered pay-per-views, like I think Starrcade '85 had like a Mexican death match with a sombrero on the pole match. I mean, they had a bull rope match. Do you think? Well, at least now we're talking about now, and later. Do you think gimmick matches were bigger draw back then than they would be now?
Yeah, they made more sense back then. Now it can still work. I mean, we're seeing TLC come up Sunday, but it still didn't have the same significance as a Buried Alive back in '96 this year. I believe it was.
Yeah, I mean I mean I think that back in the day, back in the mid '80s, they put on the bill, a Mexican death match, or a hair versus hair match, a hair versus mask match. That would draw people in, but now people are just so used to cage matches. I mean, I've noticed in the WWE, and they've done it more recently, that they go under the rope, they go under the ring to get like a chair. They pull out like tables, ladders, chairs, kendo stick. I mean, have you noticed that the WWE, they must have a stockpile of that stuff underneath the ring, because they will pull out like 10 kendo sticks, 5 ladders, 6 tables, 30 chairs, a trash can, a broom. I mean, it's like they keep their whole maintenance stuff underneath the ring. I just don't understand that.
It's almost too obvious. That's the problem. Back then, I mean, there may have been some that you see, oh, he's going to get this, but it's just like the shovel in this Buried Alive match. You didn't see that till they got to the graveside, so that at least made it more of a surprise. And that's the difference today. You're expecting it too much. People get trained on, oh, well, there's got to be something under the ring. It's too obvious, and that was different back in your house. What we're talking about, Buried Alive.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, I mean, I love a good gimmick match, but it's, I mean, they do. I like a good, collar and elbow tie up. I mean, I love a good, good clean match. I mean, you see that a lot in AEW, and most recently, I mean, with WWE, they don't have as many gimmick matches, but it's one of those things that I am looking so forward to next week's show. I mean, it's going to be a great. We're going to be talking about two pay-per-views. We're going to be talking about In Your House 9 International Incident. We're going south of the border, so hopefully, Tyler, you have your visa, your passport good to go. And
I
then
better
we're
be careful.
And then, well, yeah, I don't know what happens. I don't think they're allowing us in Canada, but we're going to sneak in. It's going to be an international incident. Then we have Mayhem 1999, so it's a WCW and WWF pay-per-view, but we want to thank you for watching. So for the great Tyler Peters, as always, I am David Fine. We will see you back here next week. And of course, remember, you can always watch this on OneWrestlingVideo.com. We will see you back here next week where we talk In Your House 9 International Incident and of course, Mayhem from 1999. We'll see you next week.